John had always believed his life was ordinary, even predictable. He worked long hours at a local factory to provide for his family. His wife, Lisa, stayed home to care for their 5 children, 2 boys and 3 girls, all under the age of 10. Their house was small and messy, but it was full of life. It was the kind of noisy, chaotic home where the sounds of laughter and arguments blended into the hum of family life. One evening, everything changed. John came home late after a tiring shift at work. He opened the door to find the house eerily quiet. The children were in their rooms, and Lisa was standing in the living room, surrounded by a pile of suitcases. John froze, confused by the sight. "What's going on?" he asked, setting down his lunchbox. Lisa avoided his eyes. Her voice trembled as she said, "I can't do this anymore, John. I need to leave." John's heart sank. "What do you mean? Leave? Leave where? What about the kids?" Lisa hesitated, her eyes darting to the floor. "I need time to figure out who I am. I've been feeling trapped, and I need space. I'm not happy." John felt like the ground had been pulled out from under him. The weight of her words hit him like a brick. "Lisa, we can figure this out together. We're a family." But Lisa shook her head. "I've already made up my mind. I'm leaving tonight." John couldn't believe what he was hearing. "And the kids? You're just going to walk away from them?" Tears filled Lisa's eyes, but she didn't answer. She grabbed her suitcases and walked out the door. The sound of it closing echoed through the small house, leaving a silence so loud it hurt. For a moment, John stood frozen, trying to process what had just happened. His wife, the mother of their 5 children, had left, just like that. He looked around the house, at the toys scattered on the floor and the unfinished dinner on the table. His world had just turned upside down. John forced himself to pull it together. He walked to each of the kids' rooms, finding them confused and worried. They had overheard parts of the conversation and had questions he didn't know how to answer. His youngest daughter, Emily, tugged on his sleeve and asked, "When is Mommy coming back?" John knelt down and hugged her tightly. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said honestly, "but I promise you, I'll take care of you." That night, John barely slept. His mind raced with fears and doubts. How could he raise 5 children alone? He didn't know how to cook, clean, or manage the day-to-day tasks that Lisa had always handled. He felt overwhelmed, like he was drowning. But as he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, he made a decision. He couldn't change what had happened, but he could control what happened next. His children needed him now more than ever, and he wasn't going to let them down. The next morning, as the sun rose, John got out of bed, determined to face whatever challenges lay ahead. He didn't know how, but he was going to make it work for his kids. The first week after Lisa left was the hardest for John. He felt like he was thrown into a world he didn't understand. The kids needed him for everything: breakfast, lunch, dinner, school rides, homework, and bedtime stories. It was overwhelming, and John didn't know where to start. The first morning, he woke up late. The alarm clock had gone off, but he hit snooze, thinking Lisa would take care of things like she always had. When he finally dragged himself out of bed, he realized the house was in chaos. The kids were arguing over cereal boxes, the baby was crying, and no one had gotten dressed for school. Okay, calm down," John shouted, but his voice barely rose above the noise. He quickly learned that nothing in parenting came easy. By the time he got everyone ready for school, they were 30 minutes late. The teachers gave him polite but concerned looks when he dropped off the kids. He tried to smile, but he felt like a failure already. At home, the silence was deafening. John didn't know what to do. The laundry was piling up, there were dishes in the sink, and every corner of the house seemed to need cleaning. Lisa had always managed these things, and he hadn't realized how much work it took to keep everything running smoothly. That evening, he tried cooking dinner, but it was a disaster. The pasta boiled over, the sauce burned, and the kids barely touched the food. "Dad," his son Michael said, pushing his plate away, "this doesn't taste like Mom's spaghetti." John forced a smile. "I'll get better, I promise," he said, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. That night, after putting the kids to bed, John sat at the kitchen table, staring at the mess around him. He felt completely alone. He missed Lisa, not just as his wife, but as his partner in raising their children. How could she leave him to figure this out on his own? But as he looked around, he saw the drawings his kids had made stuck to the fridge. He saw their school shoes lined up by the door. He thought about their smiles and their laughter, and something inside him shifted. "I can't give up," he said to himself. "They're counting on me." The next day, he decided to try a new approach. He started by making a list of everything that needed to be done. He divided his tasks into small, manageable steps. He asked for help from his neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman who had raised 6 kids of her own. She taught him simple tricks for cooking and cleaning, and she even shared a few easy recipes. John also involved the kids. He gave each of them small chores, like setting the table or folding laundry. At first, they complained, but soon they started enjoying it, especially when he turned chores into games. Slowly, the chaos began to feel more manageable. The meals weren't perfect, and the house was far from spotless, but John felt a glimmer of hope. That night, as he tucked Emily into bed, she looked up at him with sleepy eyes and said, "You're doing a good job, Daddy." Her words filled him with determination. He might not have chosen this path, but he was going to make it work, for his kids and for himself. A month had passed since Lisa left, and while life was still far from perfect, John was beginning to find his rhythm. The mornings were less chaotic, and the children were starting to adjust to their new routine. However, deep down, John still struggled with self-doubt. Was he doing enough? Was he capable of being both a father and a mother to his kids? One Saturday morning, as John sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, he noticed his daughter Emily sitting quietly in the corner, holding a doll with a missing arm. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" he asked, setting his mug down. Emily looked up, her big eyes filled with sadness. "My doll is broken, and Mommy always used to fix it." "Can you fix it, Daddy?" John hesitated. Fixing toys wasn't something he'd ever thought about. But as he looked at Emily's hopeful face, he realized he couldn't say no. "Of course I can fix it," he said, though he wasn't sure how. He spent the next hour at the kitchen table with a needle and thread, carefully sewing the doll's arm back on. It wasn't perfect. The stitches were uneven, and the arm hung at an awkward angle, but when he handed the doll back to Emily, her face lit up. "Thank you, Daddy," she said, throwing her arms around him. In that moment, John felt a surge of pride. It didn't matter that the stitches weren't perfect. What mattered was that he tried. From then on, John started looking at challenges differently. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, he began to see them as opportunities to grow. When his oldest son, Michael, struggled with math homework, John sat with him every night, relearning fractions and decimals so he could help. When his daughter Sophie wanted to bake cookies for her school bake sale, John rolled up his sleeves and learned how to use the oven. One evening, as John was folding laundry in the living room, his neighbor Mrs. Thompson knocked on the door. "I brought you something," she said, handing him an old recipe book. "It's full of simple meals. Thought it might help." John smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. I'll definitely give these a try." With the recipe book in hand, John began experimenting in the kitchen. His first few attempts were disasters. Burnt casseroles, undercooked chicken, and a soup so salty the kids refused to eat it. But he didn't give up. Each mistake taught him something new, and soon he was making meals that the kids actually enjoyed. One evening, after serving a surprisingly delicious lasagna, his daughter Sophie said, "Dad, this is better than Mom's cooking." John laughed, feeling a mixture of pride and disbelief. "Don't let her hear you say that." As the weeks turned into months, John noticed something else changing. The kids were smiling more, laughing more. They started helping each other without being asked. It wasn't just John who was growing. The entire family was becoming stronger. That night, as John sat in the quiet living room, surrounded by the soft hum of his sleeping children, he realized something important. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was building a new life. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And for the first time in months, John felt hopeful about the future. By the time a full year had passed, John's life looked very different. What had once felt like an impossible challenge had become a daily routine. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. The mornings that used to start in chaos now began with teamwork. John would wake up early to prepare breakfast while the kids got ready for school. His pancakes, once lumpy and burnt, were now a family favorite. The kids had even started calling him Chef Dad. "Dad, these are the best pancakes ever," Michael said one morning, his mouth full of syrupy goodness. John chuckled. "Well, don't get used to it. Tomorrow, it's oatmeal." The family laughed, and John couldn't help but smile. Moments like this reminded him of how far they had come. But it wasn't just about breakfast routines. John had also become more involved in his children's lives. He attended every school event, from parent-teacher conferences to talent shows. He cheered loudly at their soccer games and clapped the hardest at their piano recitals. One Saturday, Sophie came home with a flyer for a father-daughter dance at her school. "Will you come with me, Dad?" she asked, her eyes wide with excitement. John hesitated. He had never been much of a dancer, and the thought of being on a dance floor terrified him. But when he saw how much it meant to her, he couldn't say no. "Of course I will," he said, smiling. That night, John found himself in the school gym, wearing a suit he hadn't put on in years. Sophie was beaming as they danced together, and though John's moves were clumsy, she didn't seem to care. "You're the best dad ever," she whispered as they swayed to the music. Moments like that gave John the strength to keep going. He started to see himself not just as a single father, but as a capable and loving parent. At home, he began teaching the kids important life skills. He showed them how to do their own laundry, helped them pack their school lunches, and even taught Michael how to mow the lawn. One evening, as they were cleaning up after dinner, Emily asked, "Daddy, why do we have to do chores now?" John smiled. "Because one day, you'll grow up and have your own home. You'll need to know how to take care of it." "Like you take care of us?" she asked, looking up at him with wide eyes. "Exactly," John said, ruffling her hair. "Family is about taking care of each other." As the weeks went by, John noticed the kids becoming more independent. They started helping each other with homework, sharing responsibilities, and even surprising him with small acts of kindness. One night, after tucking the kids into bed, John sat on the couch and looked around the house. It wasn't perfect. The furniture was old, the walls had a few scratches, and the budget was always tight. But it was home. For the first time in a long while, John felt proud, not just of himself, but of his family. They had faced so many challenges, but they had come through them stronger. As he sat there, listening to the peaceful silence of the house, he realized something important. His life might not be what he had planned, but it was full of love, laughter, and hope. And that was enough. As the months turned into years, John's life continued to evolve. He had learned how to balance his job, raise his 5 children, and still find moments to laugh. But even though things were better, it wasn't always easy. There were still sacrifices to be made, and sometimes it felt like the weight of everything was too much to bear. John had always worked hard at his job, but now, with no help at home, he found himself stretching his hours. There were days when he worked late into the evening, just to make sure the family bills were paid. While he wasn't making much money, he knew it was enough to get by. But it meant that his personal dreams had to be put on hold. One evening, after a long day at work, John sat on the couch, exhausted. He had missed yet another school event because of a last-minute shift. His phone buzzed with a message from Sophie, his second daughter, asking if he would be able to attend her art show the next day. John read the message and sighed. He wished he could be everywhere at once, but reality always seemed to get in the way. "I'll try my best, sweetie," he texted back, "but I can't promise." It hurt him to disappoint her. As much as he loved his kids and wanted to be there for them, there were times when he couldn't make it, and each time he had to say no, it felt like another small piece of himself was being chipped away. There were also moments when John felt frustrated with his limited resources. The kids needed new clothes, the car was starting to break down, and he could barely afford to fix it. John didn't want to let the kids know how tight things were, so he kept his worries to himself. One day, as he was looking through a stack of bills, Michael came into the room. "Dad, can I have some extra money for a school trip?" John smiled at his son, trying to hide the worry in his eyes. "I'm not sure we can afford it right now, Michael. We'll figure something out, okay?" Michael nodded, but John could see the disappointment on his face. He hated having to tell his kids no, but sometimes there was no choice. That night, John lay awake in bed, thinking about the future. He had sacrificed so much to make sure his children had everything they needed, but he had little left for himself. The dreams he once had, getting a better job, traveling, or just enjoying some time to himself, seemed so far out of reach. But then he remembered something. It wasn't about what he was missing. It was about what he had. He had 5 incredible kids who depended on him. He had built a life for them that, while not perfect, was filled with love and effort. And in that moment, John realized that the sacrifices he made were worth it. They were a part of what made him the father his children needed. The next morning, John woke up earlier than usual. He made pancakes for breakfast and packed lunches for the kids. As he sent them off to school, he reminded them, "I may not always be able to do everything you want, but I will always do my best for you." His kids smiled, and Michael gave him a hug. "Thanks, Dad. We know." For John, that was enough. He might have to keep making sacrifices, but he would do it gladly. His love for his children was stronger than any setback or challenge he faced. Let me know if you'd like to continue with part 6. You said, part 6 to 550 words in simple English words. It should be interesting, and every part should be engaging so the audience doesn't get bored. And don't use any violated word. Avoid any violated content. 10 years had passed since Lisa left, and John had learned to manage his life and raise his children on his own. He had grown into a strong and confident father, and the kids were doing well. They had learned to help each other, and more importantly, they knew how much their father loved them. One day, out of the blue, John received a message from Lisa. It had been years since he had heard from her, and he had no idea what to expect. The message was short, just a few words. "Can we talk? I want to see the kids." John felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of him wanted to ignore the message, to keep the past where it belonged. But another part of him wondered if Lisa had changed. Could she really be back to try and fix things? Could she be ready to be part of their lives again? After thinking for a long time, John decided to respond. "I'll let the kids know. They might want to talk to you." He didn't know if they were ready to see her. The kids had grown up without her, and they had learned to live without the mother who had left them behind. But John knew this conversation would be important, even if it was painful. The next day, when he told the children about the message, they reacted in different ways. Michael, now a teenager, frowned. Why does she want to see us now? After all this time? Sophie, on the other hand, seemed curious. Maybe she wants to say sorry. I don't know. It's been so long. Emily, the youngest, was more hopeful. Maybe she wants to come back. I miss her. John could see the confusion in their eyes. They all had different feelings about their mother's return. He knew they needed to talk about it, but he wasn't sure what to say. It had been so many years, and the hurt from her leaving still lingered. After much thought, John made a decision. He would allow Lisa to come visit, but only if the kids were ready. He wanted them to have control over how they handled the situation. A few days later, Lisa arrived at their house. John opened the door to find her standing there, a little older, a little more tired, but still the same person. There was no grand reunion, no big words of apology. It was just Lisa standing at the door, waiting to be let in. John didn't know what to say, but he stepped aside and let her in. The kids were quiet as they entered the living room. It was a strange moment, full of awkwardness and unspoken emotions. Lisa looked at her children, unsure of where to begin. "I've missed you all," she said, her voice soft. "I know I haven't been there for you, but I want to be now. I want to try again, to be a part of your lives." John didn't know how to feel. His heart ached for the kids who had missed out on a mother's love, and he couldn't ignore the anger that had built up inside him. But he also knew that the children needed to decide how they wanted to move forward. This wasn't about him, it was about them. The kids stood quietly, unsure of what to say. Finally, Michael spoke up. "You left us. You chose to leave. Why now? What changed?" Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Michael. I made a terrible mistake. I thought I needed to find myself, but what I really needed was you. I've spent all these years regretting my choices." The room was filled with tension, but John knew that this conversation, however difficult, was just the beginning. The future wasn't clear, but it was a chance to rebuild, even if it meant facing hard truths. Lisa's words hung in the air, and for a moment, everything was still. The kids sat in silence, unsure of how to react. After all these years, their mother was back, but it wasn't the same. The time she had spent away from them had created a distance that felt impossible to close. John could see the pain in his children's eyes. Michael's expression was hard, like he was trying to protect himself from getting hurt again. Sophie looked at her mother, unsure if she should hug her or turn away. Emily, the youngest, still looked hopeful but didn't know how to feel about this new version of her mother. Lisa seemed to sense their hesitation. She wiped her eyes and spoke softly. "I know it's going to take time to rebuild trust. I know I can't just walk back in and expect everything to be okay. I want to earn back your love, but I understand if that's something you're not ready to give me." John listened, his heart torn. It was clear that Lisa regretted leaving, but could the children forgive her? And what about him? Could he ever let go of the hurt and the years she had missed? After a long silence, Michael stood up and spoke. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Mom. You left us when we needed you. We've had to figure everything out on our own. Dad did everything for us, and I don't think I can just forget that." His words hit Lisa hard, and she looked down, ashamed. But before she could respond, Sophie, her voice soft but steady, spoke up. "I don't know what to feel either, but I think I just want to get to know you again. It's been so long, and you're a stranger to me now, but maybe we can start fresh." Emily, who had been quietly sitting on the couch, stood up and walked over to Lisa. She looked at her mother with wide, innocent eyes and said, "I missed you, Mommy. Will you come back to stay with us?" Lisa knelt down, tears flowing freely now. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'll spend every day trying to make up for the time I lost. I will be here for you, for all of you, if you'll let me." John watched the scene unfold, his heart heavy with emotion. The children were dealing with the reality of what had happened in their own ways. Sophie was willing to give Lisa a chance, Michael wasn't ready to forgive, and Emily just wanted things to go back to how they were before. But what struck John the most was the honesty in their reactions. His children were old enough now to understand the weight of the situation. They knew they had been hurt, and they weren't willing to just forget the past. Yet, they also had the ability to offer a chance for something new, something different. It was a testament to their strength, their resilience, and the way they had been raised. Lisa looked at John, waiting for his response. She was prepared for whatever he might say. It had taken years for her to come to this point, and she wasn't going to give up on her family now. John took a deep breath. "We've all been through a lot," he said slowly, "and I can't promise that everything will be easy. But we can try. For the sake of the kids and for ourselves, we'll take it one step at a time." It wasn't a promise of immediate forgiveness, but it was a step toward healing. It was a new beginning, one that was long overdue. As the days passed, the tension in the house slowly began to ease. Lisa was back, but things were far from perfect. The children's emotions were still raw, and trust had to be rebuilt. But little by little, they began to open up, and the process of healing started. Lisa, understanding the delicate nature of the situation, didn't rush anything. She spent time with each child individually, trying to understand their feelings, their hopes, and their fears. She listened more than she spoke, and her presence in the house was different this time. It wasn't about being their mother again overnight. It was about being there for them, in whatever way they needed. One evening, Lisa and John sat together after the kids had gone to bed. The house was quiet, and the weight of the years that had passed hung in the air. "Do you think we can do this?" Lisa asked softly, her voice filled with doubt. John sighed, his hand resting on the table between them. "I don't know. I don't think it will ever be easy. The kids have been through a lot, and it's going to take time. But I do think it's worth trying." Lisa nodded. "I don't expect everything to go back to how it was. I can't change the past, but I want to be part of their lives again. I want to make up for lost time." John looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "I can't promise things will ever be the same, but maybe they don't need to be. We can make a new kind of family, one built on understanding, patience, and love." Lisa smiled, though her eyes were filled with emotion. "A new kind of family," she whispered. "I like that." The weeks that followed were filled with small victories. Michael, still guarded, began to talk to Lisa more. He didn't share everything, but he started asking questions and sharing bits of his life. Sophie, always the more forgiving one, spent time with Lisa, teaching her about the things that had changed in her life during the years they were apart. Emily, with her innocent heart, continued to be the bridge between Lisa and the others, always hopeful that things would work out. John, too, had to adjust. He wasn't sure what role Lisa would play in their lives now. Would she be a full-time mother again, or would she remain more distant, like an aunt? He didn't have all the answers, and he didn't expect to. The most important thing was that they were moving forward together, one step at a time. One evening, as they all sat down for dinner, John looked around the table at his children and Lisa. They were laughing, talking, and sharing stories about their day. For the first time in years, the family felt whole again, though not in the same way it had before. It was a new kind of whole, one that was built on the strength of surviving the difficult journey. "Dad," Sophie said suddenly, breaking into his thoughts, "can we do something fun this weekend? Like a family outing? I think it's time we made some new memories." John smiled, his heart warm with hope. "I think that sounds like a great idea." And so they did. They took a trip to the park, had a picnic by the lake, and spent the day together, laughing and enjoying the simple pleasures of life. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. As the sun set that evening, John looked at his family, his heart filled with gratitude. He had fought hard to get here, and while the road had been long and difficult, he had never given up. Now, with Lisa back and the children by his side, they were ready to face whatever came next, knowing they could handle it, together. And as they walked home, side by side, John realized something important. It wasn't the perfect moments that made a family strong. It was the imperfect ones. The struggles, the sacrifices, the love, and the willingness to move forward together. This was their new beginning, and it was more than enough.